Withers. Is that it for now? Awesome. So we will start with the resolutions on public hearing. The first one is RS 2022-1638 by our very own Councilman Withers to exempt Velvet Taco in East Nashville at 301 Gallatin Avenue, not Pike, from the minimum distance requirements for obtaining a beer permit. Would someone like to move? Yeah.
Second.
Awesome. Would you like to explain a little bit about Velvet Taco or beer?
Well, this is the long-lamented Calypso Cafe of East Nashville that's been vacant for a while. I've been around long enough to remember when it was a Payless Shoe source. Velvet Taco will be moving in, and the young folks love their tacos. So, and you know, beer is that without which life does not exist.
Agreed. Do you have any questions, Council Lady Benedict?
Thank you, Chair. I just want to make sure Gallatin Avenue is south of Eastland Avenue. Is that right? But north of there is Pike?
No, it doesn't become Pike till after Riley.
Riley, okay. Good to know. All right. Just wanted to check. Cool.
And
it's a very distinguishing feature of Madison.
It's a very distinguishing feature of Gallatin Pike. Clarksville Highway in some places is called Highway, in other places it's Clarksville Pike. We have this everywhere.
I will add that my church is across the street from this, and probably we will have lots of church.
Interesting. And will they be able to sell beer on Sundays?
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay, so
they have the Lord's approval.
Do we have any other questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And the next item on the agenda is by our very own Council Lady Benedict, RS 2022-1639, to exempt 5602 Gallatin Pike from the minimum distance requirements for obtaining a short-term rental property non-owner occupied permit.
Move approval.
Second.
Thank you. Would you like to explain a little bit about this?
Absolutely. So this is the former Value Vet location at the corner on the opposite of Broadmoor, there on Gallatin, right next door to Lytton Alumni Center, and also within 100 feet of Lytton Middle School. And so the reason for the minimum distance requirement is because it's so close to Lytton Middle School. Having said that, the appellant's, the applicant's plan is to build potentially a two-story building with retail or mixed use on the bottom and as many as 6 short-term rental units on top. And so those 6 short-term rentals, which they could be long-term, they're going to be condos, flats, rather, as I understand it, for sale. And they could be short-term rentals, they could be owner-occupied, but it's short-term rental eligible is the purpose of this, based on, again, that minimum distance requirement. I'm supportive of this. It's on Gallatin Pike, which in my opinion, if we want to do any type of short-term rentals, we don't want them back in the neighborhood, but rather we would want them on a place where an Uber or a Lyft or somebody can drop them off, pick them up, take them around the number 56, take the bus, whatever it might be. This to me seems like a good location to support a short-term rental if there's any location to support it. And so for that, I'd ask again, I'd renew my request for this committee to approve.
And is it a flat when it's on the Madison side of Bradley Parkway and a condo when it's on the East Nashville side?
So the difference in my real estate career, I'm going to put on my daytime job hat. My understanding is that a townhome is everything all the way through the ground, up to the sky, and between your walls. A condo is just your own little box within that. It's not all the way to the ground, it's not all the way to the sky, It's just the box. Now, that's my understanding.
And then what about a flat?
I think that's just vernacular.
Awesome. Anyone else have anything to add to the flat condo townhouse discussion?
A lot of times you have stacked flats, which is where there are units on different floor levels.
Also condo.
We're talking about 2 levels here, though.
Yeah.
We're having an academic conversation.
Does anyone have any other questions about? Yes, Councilman Parker.
Yeah. So the legislation that exempted or that prohibited short-term rental permits from going in within 100 foot or whatever we landed on with the rules. You know, my view of this exemption process was personally more to sort of grandfather in properties that had already been built for that use. And I'm going to respectfully against this because I don't think that we should be building more multifamily housing specifically for short-term rental use in Nashville at this point. We have an affordable housing crisis, and I'm just not in favor of this. So respectfully, I'm going to vote against you on this. I apologize.
Yeah, I don't.
Understand? Councilman Cash?
So I want to understand, this is because of the zoning law that changed, or because it's proximity to something else?
Proximity
To
the school.
To the school.
The middle school.
Okay.
The property abuts the middle school property at the rear of the property.
And so have the applicants, have the owners of, those who want the non-owner occupied permit for the short-term rentals, like you've spoken with them and you feel good that they're going to manage it well and be cognizant of the school that's close by?
Absolutely, and they're here tonight, and in addition to that, we've spoken, they were absolutely quickly upfront saying, we want to apply for this. Would you be interested? Would you consider it? The other part of that is that they live in the district as well. So they are local to District 7 and very much care about the community.
Any other questions, comments, or concerns? All in favor?
Aye.
And opposed?
No.
And any abstentions? All right, and the next resolution is RS 2022-1656 by Councilor Stiles to request the Department of Codes to issue a monthly report to council regarding codes enforcement after regular business hours.
Move approval.
Second.
All right, and Councilor Stiles, would you like to explain your resolution?
Yes, please. Thank you, Chair. So when we were in the budget season, I had put forth the idea of having a co-response team that would involve codes and police and fire to be able to go out between the hours of 3 p.m. and 11 p.m. to handle those violations that are coming in, because some of those violations that come in, you can't check during the day. So a lot of times there's illegal lights that are, on the outside of people's homes. If someone's doing an illegal business, running a chop shop or something, they're not doing that during the day, they're doing that at night. And so those complaints will come in, but then they only do night investigations maybe once a month. So there's a backlog of that. So this will allow us to get a monthly report, and it would start August 1st, so we could find out how July has gone and how many of those violations are still open, how many of them have been tended to, they've been closed, how long have they been sitting on a report.
And we have some staff here from Codes as well, and I have a couple of questions for you, and then you're welcome to explain other things that you'd like to explain about this. So right now, you do a monthly report, is that correct?
Yes, we actually have the ability to submit data on the public portal, and it would just be a matter of amending the data that's being reported to add an item that would quantify this particular type of inspection. We are currently performing night inspections. There isn't a backlog. What happens is more than 90% of the requests that we have come in are light inspections. So what we try to do is accumulate 2 or 3 of those so that we maximize our employee going out to make those inspections, and so that's why sometimes there may be a little delay in making the inspection, but we do have a process to do that, and it would be efficient to add a line item to the already reporting that we're doing as far as the metrics that we're doing for the public portal.
And right now, when people report things, are they reporting them via the hub?
They report them via the hub, or they call us directly sometimes. Sometimes our inspectors will go out, they'll get like a parking on the grass. It's obvious that somebody is parking on the grass, but we can't catch them. So they'll ask that we can put that on a night schedule just to see if we can catch somebody in that regard. So that's generally how those come in.
And the hub is an 8 to 5 sort of reporting. So if they were to report it at, say, 5:30, it would be received the next morning anyway.
Absolutely.
Right?
The hub cuts off at 5, and so anything that comes in after that would be processed at 8 o'clock the next morning. And so, generally speaking, depending on what it is, if it's a night inspection, obviously we probably won't respond immediately to that. But any other inspection that comes in, if it comes in early enough, if we get it processed early enough, we can make that inspection that same day. That is. Otherwise, it's within 24 hours usually.
And did you have anything else you wanted to share with us about this? And then we'll have some other questions, I think, too, from some of our council members.
Okay. Just that we're not opposed to reporting. It's just that since we are generating information already for the metrics for the mayor's public portal, we could just add that. You could just add that to that, and then anyone would have access to that information.
Instead of just council.
Yes.
Got it. Yes, Councilman Cass.
So, yeah, I want to ask a little bit more about the monthly report. Is that what we get on the, first of the month, we get a report?
For property standards and all
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
For surveillance.
Is that, and it seems like it automatically.
Yeah, one of them still says it's from Karen.
Karen West.
Karen, and she's no longer with us, but it has her name on it.
So there'll be in that, there'll be a category that says after hours. Is that?
More than likely.
I'm assuming that report that we get on the first that's automatically sent out is what this is talking about, and there'll be the request is that there be a new category that states these are after hours. I mean, I guess in that report, how will we be able to see what was done after hours? Okay.
It would really depend on just the data. It really depends on what you want to see. If you want, and that can be designed any way that would be necessary. I mean, the information as to when it came in, what the violation, what the problem was there a violation identified, when that initial inspection, all of those things are generally reported when we report our general activity within everybody's district. So that information is already there for the most part. It's just a matter of maybe keying it so that it sort of stands out as a night inspection. And we have created a night inspection problem type so that it would be easier for IT to pull that out and for any kind of report that might be required.
So yeah, I guess that's what I'm asking, and so you're kind of, what I'm hearing is that you're not totally sure exactly how it's going to be.
I would imagine it's going to be, the data is going to be exactly like the data that's already reported. The only difference is going to be perhaps that when you look at the problem type of the data that's reported, instead of CAH, it may be NAT or something like that.
And I think that Councilor Stiles, and I'll let you speak to this too, is requesting a new report for council, whereas Codes has a report already that they suggested they could just add the nightly information to. Yes, Councilor Stiles.
Thank you, Chair. That is exactly what I've asked for, an independent report so we don't have to search for it. It's going to break down for us the dates that complaints came in, how long it took for it to be addressed, was it completed, also what items were left over potentially from the month before.
And how many, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So it'll come, you're saying this report is intended to come separately from
Correct.
the monthly report?
As a spreadsheet, yes.
Okay, and is it expected that, there are 35 council members, but this says council? I mean, we get, as a district council member, we get the codes report each month, so it'll be
For
like
your
that.
individual district, but this would come to all of us so that we could see across the board how many nighttime violations are across the city.
So in the last year, how many did we have?
27.
So we'd probably each month get a report with 2.
A couple.
Well, but that's what she's saying is we'll get it all. We'll get all 27.
Right, all
We have 27 total.
She wants one every month, so it'd be, so if you like the math, it'd be 2 every single month except for, October, November, December, and then it'd be 3.
Oh, it's 27 last year.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Only
All year.
2?
But that's just for lights. That's not including businesses being run illegally at night. I know I have driven around my district and caught several people running businesses out of their garages. So if you report that or one of your constituents reports that, Codes has to go out and investigate that. And if they're only out once a month, there are several reports that they're not getting. So that's why it's a separate report.
Gotcha.
I couldn't hear.
Would you like to explain that again, your reasoning for the separate report? Codes couldn't hear.
Yes. So separate report so we can see the entirety of the city, because it's not just lights, it's also illegal businesses being run out of homes, and then people, that'll park on grass, those kinds of things that are happening at night after hours, but are still codes violations that people are reporting. And I know I've had a lot of conversations with my property standards chief, Monica Bishop, who's been amazing and is very much on top of what's coming in and how often she's able to address things. And she's very supportive of this because
TikTok.
she's the one going, sending reps out to handle this.
What do you mean, just lights? I don't understand what you mean by that.
So lights on the outside of your house, so if you walk up to someone's house and the light comes on, so those lights sometimes are illegally bright. And so those are the violations.
So you're saying there's only 27, you're saying all 27 of the after-hours violations are lights?
No, I'm saying that there are lights and also other violations at night.
And are the 27 violations all lights, or are they also other?
They're not all.
So
they're
all
not.
violations that have happened at night that have been reported
That
were
have been reported to
27
us
total?
Have been, it's just 27. Most of them were light. There were some vehicles parking on the grass. I believe there might have been one where it was supposedly a illegal business going on activity. But right now, a majority are light. Now, we'll certainly investigate any that come in, and it's just a matter of, they do have to come in to us. It's not, and that's how we generally do those. And my inspectors even sometimes, like I said, will refer things when they suspect that, yes, I think this is going on, let's have a look at it at night. And sometimes they'll look at it at night, we'll see it. Once we approach it, then, because it started out as a daytime inspection, it without changing that problem type, it's going to show up as a daytime situation. And there are a number of those.
Councilman
I got another one, sorry.
Yeah, absolutely.
Something just came to me. So is Saturday and Sunday during the day considered after hours?
Sunday, we do inspections on Saturday and Sunday, actually. We have done some on those days as
So
well.
like
It just
construction
depends on
on-
the situation.
Construction, which is not allowed on noise coming from construction on Sunday is not allowed, so that would be included?
Well, my division has not looked at those.
Okay, this is just property standards.
Yeah.
It's only because by the time we would get that complaint, we're overcome by events. If it happens on Sunday, we're not going to know about it until Monday. And if those come in, I immediately get those to the building division. They go out to that project site and talk to that superintendent or that foreman or whomever to make sure that they understand what the rules are. And they deal with that directly.
Okay.
And that goes for construction.
But that's
noise.
not a part of this report, this is property
Construction
standards.
is different,
Okay,
yes.
okay. Thanks.
Do we have any other questions? Yes, Councilor Porterfield.
And I apologize, my delay, but I wanted to confirm, this does cover people that are operating businesses that should not be, and I wanted to make sure that, I know it may sound like 27 is like maybe not a lot of reports, but what I do know is that people in our community are not always reporting because HUB is, the thought is that, I can report something to HUB 24 hours a day. However, people know that this is primarily a Monday through Friday business hours operation. So I've had constituents to call me at 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning because someone has rented out an Airbnb and they have now turned this into a nightclub. Like we had an actual situation where a home was turned into a nightclub. There were flyers on social media. People come into this house every weekend and, it was taking a while for police enforcement to get there. It was something that we had to try to work with through codes to get it resolved. But initially, neighbors weren't reporting it to HUB because they didn't think that anything would be able to be done with it. So I support this, and I think that it is very needed. So.
And so one thing that Bill was explaining to the committee before you came in was that right now we do get a monthly report, and he would be able to add a category for after-hours violations. Instead of creating a new report just for council with the average of 2 violations a month, he would be able to just add that to our existing report so that we would still be able to track all of those things and all the calls. That was the alternative option. Other questions? Yes, Councilman.
The council body voted for legislation that allows businesses to be operated out of homes, albeit with a home occupation permit, which I kind of feel is probably difficult to enforce, but one of the limitations of that permit, assuming that one has one to begin with, but were hours of operation and things like that. So these would be things where an inspector would determine, do they have a permit such as that on file? And if so, were they operating outside of those hours? And then we would have a process to investigate that. I'm assuming similar to the way we do with short-term rental violations or something like that. Or...
Yes, now the short-term rental, a lot of things with the short-term rental, the situation, the issue with that is it's difficult, because I have female employees and they're very apprehensive about going up in the evening to a party situation that's going on. And I even have male employees who are, because unlike Metro PD, we don't have flak jackets, we don't have pistols, and we don't have badges. So, and then the other side of that is if we go to that house and they're able to cite them, well, first we have to send them an abate notice, which that has to go out. We can give them a handwritten notice. We can do that, but we have to give them a reasonable time to come into compliance. So, generally speaking, it's not going to continue to, if they're smart, they're not going to continue to happen at that particular location. And that's what's been happening with these party houses. They know, okay, I can go to 100 Oak Street, have a party, and I mean it's incredible that's going on. And they'll have it there because they know that by the time the government finds out about it, my short-term rental is over, I'm out, and I'll go rent another place. And there's nothing that prevents people from renting the properties. And yeah, there's some owners will say, yeah, you can rent, but you can't have a party, and you can't do this, and you can't do that. But unless they're on site to make that happen, it's going to happen. That is a problem that we know that is a problem. To me, and this is just Bill Penn, this isn't the codes department, the solution, the short-term solution for that is when if neighbors to call Metro PD, and Metro PD can roll up because they have the authority to tell folks, okay, music's got to be cut down, and if they suspect any other illegal drug use or whatever going on, that's got to stop. If it appears that alcohol sales are going on, they can document that, and then we can build a case. But by the time my folks would get that and get out there, it's over with, and they've okay, I'm gonna rent one over here, and I'll rent one over there. So that's a challenging situation, but we are working it.
Councilman Davis.
So the abate notice goes to the person who's renting out the Airbnb, not the owner of the Airbnb?
No, the abate notice goes to the owner.
Okay. So,
We have to abate the owner.
you were talking about somebody going somewhere else to rent another one.
Absolutely.
But it's the property owner that's if they've got a pattern of having parties, that
If we can establish a pattern,
Right.
yes. But a lot of times, again, these folks know that in order to be able to do this, you don't want to establish a pattern because then folks are going to start getting the message, hey, wait a minute, this guy or this girl was over here and had a party. You know, they move this thing around in order to make sure that they can do it. It's a very sophisticated operation, the way they're doing it, and it's very challenging, but it is something that we're working with Metro PD and other agencies to address.
And I understand what you were saying about staff, regardless of their gender, being nervous about going to those situations. But it's a problem in the city, and I hope that as you're hiring folks to inspect, you'll keep that in mind that we need folks. Sometimes Metro PD is able to do it, but we need folks to be able to document and build that case, like you said. So I hope as you're hiring people, you'll keep that in mind.
Sure.
Yes.
And I know the sponsor stepped out, but I guess for me, it sort of sounds like, maybe I'm unclear, but it sort of sounds to me like, on the one hand, we get the monthly property standards request for service report, which is like a list, and this one might flag it to say it was a nighttime complaint versus something else, but those reports are fairly static. So it sounds like the report that was described is much more like has aging, has a lot more what results happen and things like that. That sounds a little bit more involved than what we typically get every month, which is fine for me. But so I just want to be clear about that. Is it more or less going to be similar to the existing monthly property standards request for service report with some additional fields, or is it going to be a completely different report?
It could be additional fields. Basically, when we have the definition of what is needed, then we can amend the current report to add that to it.
For aging or
Yeah.
outcomes.
It's not.
And then I get the second piece of that is like, whether from the council member's perspective or from the department's perspective, what is the actual purpose of the report? Like, what do we hope to get out of the report?
Well, that's a good question. We provide data just so that council members and even the general public can know that I have turned in a request, someone has gone out and looked at it, they've either found a violation or didn't find it, and can document either why or why not, so that I know as a citizen whether or not my voice is being heard. Now, of course, there's more data behind what's on the report than what's on the report, and that's why I always encourage citizens. And yes, yes, you can go to the public portal, but if you don't understand what you see there, because we have to limit some of the information that's put out there. We try to keep, folks turn in things anonymously. We try to make sure that stays anonymous as best as possible. Though I do explain to neighbors, if you give me your name and address to call you back, that's going to end up in the record, and it's going to be out there, and somebody can see that. So you've got to decide. And say, well, how am I going to know? I said, well, you make yourself a note and to call us back, and we can look it up and give you the information if you're concerned about your information. But the data is there as far as what's happening, and if people, if they want more detail than what's on the, because at some point, you have so much detail on the report, nobody's going to read the report because there's just so much there to look at and try to figure out. So you want to make the report info enough to where they at least know, I called in, they went out, this is when they went out, this is what they did, and this is sort of the status of the request. And that's essentially what is on the report existing now.
So, yeah, Councilman.
Well, really quickly, and I was going to say, I think with what Councilman Withers was suggesting or saying is that it still gives us, it may simplify the process. We are able to get that designation, but without creating a new report, you still have the ability to cross-reference really simply with HUB, because HUB does track that information and we do know through how long it's been there, what the result was in that situation. So you're actually still going to have it in dual places. If it's reported to HUB and the codes, then it's not that difficult for us to be able to do that. So I think by adding those designations to the existing report, it works.
Yeah, I agree. I think that I certainly understand Councilor Porterfield's concern about people not reporting these things to HUB, but I didn't think us getting an additional report would change that. I think we need to work with our constituents on reporting things to HUB. And if we're getting this additional report and there's 2 items on it, then it's going to affect 1 or 2 council members, and then we're all getting the additional info. Whereas if we have it flagged or colored or highlighted or something, so that it draws our attention to that in our district, we'll pay more attention. So I'm not going to be supporting this. Do we have any other questions, concerns? And do we have a motion?
Motion. Move.
Second.
And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And opposed? Nay? And
I'll join you.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Oh, we're at 7. All right. And for the bills on second reading, BL 2022-1168, by Councilor Stiles to amend Section 9-2020 and 9-2060 to amend the noise provisions relative to motor vehicles and to authorize the Department of Codes Administration to enforce excessive noise provisions. And we also have an amendment by Councilor Allen.
Move to approve.
Second.
Do we need to move the amendment first? Or did you move to approve the amendment? Sorry.
Sorry.
It's just the bill that's been moved.
Yeah, move the bill to the table. Yeah, got it. And do we want to discuss the bill first, or do we want to move the amendment, as Councilor Porterfield was saying? Anyone?
Go with Bill, real quick.
Oh, I thought you guys were about to talk about the amendment.
Yes.
No.
Mrs. Johnson, would you like to explain the bill before we start discussing the amendment?
It's, Councilmember Allen's amendment is housekeeping, just in terms of language, so that it matches what it says for police enforcement. It also says the same in terms of codes enforcement. And I think what's important here to understand is police have the ability to give an immediate fine and to arrest people. That's not what codes is doing. When it says codes enforcement, it is referring to codes process that exists right now. And that is sending a letter of abatement if they see a violation. And then if it's not corrected, then a court date being supplied. So that is the codes enforcement that would take place. They will not be arresting or giving out immediate citations.
Thank you, Chair. Could the Codes Department explain what these noise restrictions are?
I'm sorry, can you repeat?
What the noise restrictions are, so currently the excessive noise provisions, what are those, and how would that, I guess, the follow-up to that would be, how are those, as compared to the police, how can codes enforce those?
Well, I'm not off the top of my head, I don't know the exact decibel levels, but the situation with codes as it relates to this particular situation, we don't have the ability to, what's the word I'm looking for? Our response time for this type of situation is not sufficient to make the inspection. Let's say, example, an individual pulls up in front of a house. He's got leg pipes on his car. I don't know if some of you are probably too young to know what leg pipes are, but he's got those on the car. They're making a lot of noise. Neighbor calls in to the hub or whatever, and they may call Metro PD. But if they call in the hub, or if they even call my office directly, depending on where that is and what the inspector is doing at the time that comes in, they may not and probably will not be able to get to that location before that person drives off. So because we have to see it. We have to see and hear the violation in order to issue an abate notice. And so if we can't see and hear it at the time that it is going on, then we can't issue a notice. We can't issue a notice based on a neighbor saying, yes, there was a guy or girl in front of my house or whatever, or next door, and they were revving their engine and all of that. The only way we could use that would be if we got to a point where we were going to environmental court. They would have to have some evidence, some physical evidence, either a video in this case, depicting the violation in order, and then they would have to come to court and testify that they shot that video on that day and at that time in order to submit that as evidence. Otherwise, we have no evidence of the violation. It has to be, we have to have visual, audio proof that it occurred. So we don't have, now Metro PD has more of an ability to respond to these kinds of things. We don't have that ability. And then there's the question of who do you cite if you get there and it's just a car in front of somebody's house and the engine's running, how do I cite the guy in the car? I can't cite that property owner because he may have just pulled up there. And so I guess I could maybe get the license plate and run that. But then again, by the time we do all of that, and that's assuming that we can get there when the violation's occurring, it's abated. He goes away, and so if I even give him a hand abate, he moves on. He drives on, so the violation is corrected almost on the spot. I think this really is a police function because they can respond. We all know that also motor vehicles can be involved in criminal activity, and I really have apprehension about my folks rolling up on somebody sitting in their car and saying, "Hey, your muffler's too loud. You need to cut the car off, or you need to do whatever." So we have some concerns about that, but really our responsiveness to this is going to be very limited. I mean, we can get there in time, and they're still doing it. We can hear it, but I see us being able to get there in time to be effective.
To the Human Services
Did you
Committee.
have a question,
Follow up?
Maria?
Sorry.
Yes, absolutely.
So would codes administration be able to have a supplemental role to the MMPD here? Or is this something, most often when we see noise restrictions, right, noise, the code for noise, and I've worked on construction noise, right, in the past. So the noise provision, I think it's 70 decibels, is
Something like
I
that,
think.
yeah.
And is that something that the police department today enforces? Is that something that codes can enforce? Is that something that is together? And I see the sponsor has their hand up, but I just want to understand, like, from the codes department, would you say that this lies more on the excessive noise side?
Exactly.
Something that stands more with the police department, and you may be able to supplement that based on this?
Right.
Or you may be able to supplement that today. Could you supplement that today, or does this change that?
This would change that in that right now we don't get involved in amplified noise or other types of noise other than construction noise. And there is a provision in the zoning code for industrial noise where industrial noise is impacting a residential use, we get involved in that. But outside of that, everything else is Metro PD. And that is basically because they can respond when the noise is occurring. We can't do that.
And Councilman Cash has a question.
Yeah, well, it's kind of more of a comment, I think.
Okay.
And then, comment and then question. Like what I'm hearing from Mr. Penn, I'm not inclined to support this, and I will add this, that I would like to see, these are motor vehicles. I'm assuming intended for transportation purposes, but maybe they're not being used for transportation. I would really like to see NDOT take this over. They, I think, would have more capacity. If this vehicle is, we could have some sort of rule where if a vehicle is parked and making this noise, that parking enforcement could take care of it. If it's a traffic noise, I just don't see codes being able to do that. And I guess I want to ask the sponsor if she has considered NDOT, and I feel like I want to do something about this problem, but I don't know that this is the best way to solve it. And so I want to ask the sponsor if she's thought about NDOT being an enforcer of transportation vehicles making excessive noise, and if what Mr. Penn said is what you understood as you proposed and carried this legislation forward.
Thank you. So in speaking with previous Director Herbert, that's where all these conversations started. And so I did have support from previous Director Herbert in doing this because I asked him first if it was something that codes could take on in terms of daytime enforcement. So this is not at night. This is only during the hours where codes is working that they would be able to address these issues. And so when you're talking about if your neighbor has a car with a modified muffler and they're sitting outside at 5 o'clock in the morning idling for 30 minutes, if you're in your house, you don't have to confront that person. You could take a picture of that with a date and a time stamp, and you can submit that to the hub or call that in and say, hey, where do you want me to send this via email? So there is proof of that infraction. Parking, traffic and parking, I have not thought about that. I also don't think that it's a good solution. I mean, codes already has violations that they're looking after, so during the day, that's why I went to codes to be able, just between the daytime hours that they are already working, if someone sends in a picture, that's not necessarily something that you have to go to the house that day. You've got proof from the person living in the house. And if that car, it would be if that car was belonging to your neighbor, right? You can't necessarily get someone that's just visiting per se. But at least to address things that are happening in neighborhoods with people that are constantly doing this, it would be helpful. Because I don't know about anyone else, but I have a lot of modified mufflers.
What does codes already do as it pertains to motor vehicles? Like if it's parked in the yard, that's a citation, right? And if it's abandoned, DWAL?
Yes.
Okay, and anything else with motor vehicles?
If it's parked on the grass, if it is inoperable, or if it's unlicensed on the property, we deal with that. And abandoned vehicles on the right of way. We have dealt with that. We're in the process of trying to work out a new contract for someone to demolish the vehicles once they're towed, but those are the only things we do with vehicles. If a vehicle is parked on the street and it doesn't meet the abandoned vehicle criteria, then we don't get involved with that vehicle. Our involvement is mainly vehicles on private property or commercial property that don't meet the three conditions: being on a hard surface, being fully operational, having a current metal plate.
So do you all have the contract to remove an abandoned vehicle, or do you have to call MNPD to do that?
We have to call now. Right now, we have no contract. Our contractor decided on December that he was no longer going to do it, and so we have no ability to get the vehicles towed from the right-of-way, and that's only vehicles that meet the abandoned vehicle criteria on the right-of-way. So right now, we're kind of in the process of trying to fix things.
That got a little out of the scope of this bill, but I wanted to understand where else you all had a precedent of dealing with motor vehicles.
Councilor Bennett?
Thank you, Chair. So what does the timeline look like for enforcement of this as compared to what MNPD and the current criteria looks like? So from an enforcement perspective, my understanding is that you give a citation, you come back, you inspect, you give another citation, and eventually, if you get no response, you go to court. And that timeline can take, I believe, anywhere between 3 and 6 months just to start. As compared to the burden that we put on the police department, I'd imagine it's a citation at a minimum, let's say a warning, if it happens again, a citation, and then it's straight away to court.
Yes.
So that timeline is much faster as compared to, I just want to make sure I understand the timeline. Could you explain that to me again?
Yes, our timeline would be significantly longer because first we have to see and catch the violation. Assuming that we do that, we would then try to issue a notice to the violator. And if it's a vehicle that's just parked on the street with a loud engine or muffler, then we've got to figure out some kind of way to cite that person, to get an abate to that person. If we can figure that out, then there's a matter of recheck. We have to come back and recheck to see whether or not that violation is still occurring. Obviously, if they're smart, they're not going to continue to be at that same spot, and because we have to tell them when we're coming back to recheck it, and they know when we're coming back. So if they're not there when we come back, then the violation is abated and the case is closed. So our ability to enforce this is extremely limited as opposed to what the police, because the police can issue a citation on the spot to stop doing what you're doing, and if necessary, come to court. In fact, you're in violation, come to court because you violated the sound ordinance. We can't do that. So,
Thank you, Mr. Penn. I guess with that in mind, I really appreciate the spirit of this bill. I just don't think that codes is the right place because of the workload that we already have with codes, that codes has rather, and so with that in mind, I mean, I really appreciate the spirit of this bill, and noise in our neighborhoods is so important for us to control. And in many ways, anything having to do with a car is a bit out of control in this city, including noise. Nevertheless, I just don't think codes is the right place for this, and I just don't see that I could support it. Thank you, Chair.
Any other questions or comments from?
We move the amendment.
We have not. Could staff have anything else you wanted to say about this particular bill?
no, I think it is in spirit a good thing, and that noise is an issue. Unfortunately, the Property Standards Division is really not equipped to respond and address these types of things in a timely manner. We would be more effective dealing with the proliferation of things that we already are dealing with.
Thank you very much, I appreciate it. So do we want to move the amendment before we do any voting? We have a letter from, thank you. Second? Okay, so we have a letter from the sponsor of the amendment asking us to please pass this even if she's not able to be here. So the amendment is essentially, and I think Councilor Stiles addressed this as well, what is it called? Housekeeping, yes, thank you. And to add the shall also be responsible for the enforcement of section, because we just said shall also enforce. So she just wanted it to be more in keeping with the way we normally say things. It doesn't change the spirit of the bill. So any questions about the amendment? All in favor of the amendment?
Aye.
Opposed? And so now we can, now we're on the bill as amended. Any questions about the bill as amended?
I wanted to see if the sponsor would be open to a deferral to hopefully continue to work through this. I know this is a big issue out in our neck of the woods. I can't speak for everybody else, but it's a huge issue out in our neck of the woods with loud cars, and sometimes it's actually drag racing. Sometimes it just sounds like it's drag racing because the cars are so loud. And I know that this is a big problem, and I would hate to see this go down, as it appears that right now there's not a lot of support for it. So I would love for the sponsor to have some more time to work through this. So I was hoping to hear if the sponsor was willing to do a deferral.
Would you like to move for a deferral?
I was hoping that she stuck her head back in the door.
She went in another room.
All right, so I move for a 2-meeting deferral.
Second.
All in favor of a 2-meeting deferral of the bill as amended?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Aye. Nay.
Aye.
Okay, let's try this again because I heard some ayes when I said opposed. So all in favor of a 2-meeting deferral, say aye.
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 And opposed?
No.
Okay, so that was 5 to 2. Thank you. And we are now on the next to the last item on the agenda, Bill 2022-1343 by Council Lady Hurt, to amend Title III of the Metro Code to create a new chapter relative to the hiring or selection of the head of a department or the executive director of a department, board, or commission. I do not see Council Lady Hurt present.
You may try to grab her.
She probably would
She in Human
appreciate that. And we can, before you grab her, we'll,
Mine's deferred, and I'm the last thing.
oh,
We
excellent.
deferred by rule on
Yeah.
planning.
Deferred by rule. And for the viewing audience, that's BL 2022-1344 by Councilmember Hall that was, is deferred by rule. So we're just waiting on Council Lady Hurt for BL 2022-1343.
The only thing the committee can do that sticks is an indefinite approval. Or committee will recommend.
Whatever the committee does doesn't mean it's what happens on the floor.
That's right.
All right.
It's just, unlike an indefinite deferral, it's a recommendation.
Yeah, recommendation, not a law.
So he's
Thank you.
chair of that, and
Hello, Council Lady Hurt. We are on your bill to amend Title III of the Metro Code to create a new chapter relative to the hiring or selection of a department or executive director of a department. Did we move this bill?
So moved.
Second.
Okay.
Okay.
And Council Lady Hurt.
Thank you very much. Basically, this is an instinctive move on my part, going through some legislation before and looking at it, making sure that we had transparency and inclusion in the things that we do, especially when we talk about the hiring process and selection, to ensure that there is fairness across the board. And we created the Chief Diversity and Equity and Inclusion Officer and wanted to make sure that that was done. So that was the purpose of the bill. But when I put it in place, I actually had the wrong individual, because in Metro Human Resources, we already have someone who basically is practicing what it is that I'm asking that we do. This is basically going to codify what is being done, but we want to change the amendment. Is basically moving it from the human relations to the human resources, because I actually had the wrong person.
And so would we like to move the amendment?
So moved.
Second.
All right. And Councilor Hurt just explained the amendment. Do we have any questions on the amendment? Yes.
I see that Director Hall is here. I'd love to hear from the HR department.
Yes, really appreciate the willingness and the support from Council Lady Hurt when I reached out to her, and I'm like, so this is kind of our lane and we're doing this, but I love the spirit of it, which is making sure that we have one of our DEI leaders that's participating in the selection process for all of our directors, whether they are selected by a board or commission member or by the mayor. As Council Lady Hurt mentioned, we're already doing this in practice now. Many of our recruitments, people are quite willing to allow part of that influence, whether it be interview questions, participating on the interview panel. And I said, we have the perfect person who's already doing this, that is specifically focused on workplace and workforce DEI efforts. And that is our workforce diversity manager, who's Rochelle Jones. So I cannot say this enough. Mutual thanks to the Metro Council a couple years ago for giving our DEI leader positions and the Chief Diversity Officer, who's focused a lot more externally and how we do our business practices, and then our Workforce Diversity Manager, who's focused on our DEI framework and efforts and helping us build that out, both workplace and workforce. So he is actually the perfect person for the spirit of this bill, and we're, as Council Lady said, we're already doing this. And in fact, he was helping and participating and influencing interview questions with the Arts Commission as they're leading their search for their new executive director. So to be honest with you, this just helps to codify a practice that we think should be happening across the board. So I certainly welcome it because it makes sure that that practice stays in place.
Yes, that's the one thing I was about to say. Council Lady Hauser made a good point. So this makes sure that this practice is in place, whether Director Hall or whether Mr. Jones is there or not. We're going to make sure that the process of fairness is always there.
Excellent. Any other questions about the amendment? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And now we're on the bill as amended. Any further questions, discussions? Further statement? Anything? You're just holding your pen. Okay. So all in favor of the bill as amended?
Aye.
And opposed? No abstentions? Excellent. The last item, as we mentioned before, has been deferred by rule, and that concludes the July 19th chapter of the Government Operations and Regulations Committee. Thank you for being here.
It's like
So I didn't get here and talk about that again.
Maybe one day.